college. I was a local kid. I wanted to represent Massachusetts, so I stayed home. I walked on campus, and at 18 years old, I had just got done doing a photo shoot for Sports Illustrated. And after my photo shoot, my coach pulled me aside and he said, tomorrow night we have a speaker coming in, and I want you to be here to listen to him. And I looked at my coach and I said, what kind of speaker? And he said, we have a guy come in, he's going to talk to you about substance abuse. He played in the NFL for 14 years. And I looked at my coach and I said, I'm not going. It doesn't pertain to me. I don't need to listen to it. I've heard the story a million times. He said, if you don't go, I'm going to suspend you your first game. So at 18 years old, I was forced to go to this, and I walked in and I listened to this man talk, but I had the nerve to think, I was above it. I had the nerve to think that it didn't pertain to me, so I could care less what the man said. And that night, I went home to my dorm room, and when I opened my dorm room door, there was an 18-year-old girl, freshman, sitting at my desk with my college roommate who was a Division I baseball player. And as soon as I opened my door, their body shifted, and when their body shifted, I knew they were hiding something, so I walked up. Can they hear me without that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Forget that podium. So when I walked up to them, their body shifted. When their body shifted, I knew they were hiding something, so I walked up to see what they were hiding. When I looked over their shoulder, I saw a big pile of cocaine. And at 18 years old, I had never seen cocaine. At 18 years old, cocaine to me was Len Bias. Len Bias, I used to cut his picture out and put him on my wall when I was a kid. He was the second pick in the NBA draft by the Boston Celtics. Len Bias went out on draft night, did some cocaine and overdosed and died. So when I saw cocaine, I thought of Len Bias' story and I thought of death, so I started walking out of the room, and as I'm walking out of the room, that little girl said, Chris, where you going? Come back. I promise it's not going to kill you. And those words took Len Bias right out of my memory, and I walked right back in the room like a big tough guy. I had to prove myself. I sat down at that desk and I said, I know it's not going to kill me. And she said, just put a little bit on your finger. Put a little bit on your gums. Your mouth's going to get numb. That's all it is. I did that. 2 minutes later, she chopped up 3 lines of cocaine and she pushed them out and she handed me the rolled up dollar bill and she said, go ahead. At 18 years old, I looked at that 1 line of cocaine and I said, I'm going to do this once and I'm never going to do it again. I grabbed the dollar bill, I did the line of cocaine, I got up, I walked out of the room. I had no idea that day when I decided I was going to do something once, it would take till I was 32 to put it down. I had no idea it'd be 14 years later until I could walk away from that 1 line of cocaine. In Division I basketball, you're subjected to random drug testing. I walked in for practice the next day and my coach said, before you start practice, go downstairs in the training room and take your drug test. I walked in knowing I was going to fail my first drug test for marijuana and cocaine, which I did. And my coach told me, you have 2 more chances. You fail the second one, it's a 1-game suspension. Your third one will result in a 1-year suspension. I looked at my coach and I said, I promise it will never happen again. In my first game at Boston College, I was dribbling down the court, going up for a layup. My feet got tangled up. I hit the ground. When I hit the ground, I fractured my wrist. That fracture required surgery the next day. That fracture, that surgery ended my freshman season at BC, and basketball was taken away from me for the first time. And with basketball out of my life, I jumped into drug addiction. I kept doing cocaine, I kept drinking. I said, they're not going to test me because I'm not playing. In my 3rd month, I failed my 2nd test. And in my 4th consecutively, I failed my 3rd. And they called me into the office and they said, Chris, we know you were Player of the Year. We knew you scored 2,000 points. We knew you were McDonald's All-American. But we don't want you here. We're going to take away your scholarship. We're not going to suspend you 1 season. You obviously have a drug problem that you need to deal with, and we don't want you on our campus anymore. They told me that security was outside. They were going to follow me back to my room. I had to pack my bags and be off campus by the end of the day. So at 18 years old, I lost my scholarship. I had to move back to Fall River, Massachusetts with my parents. And the next day I woke up to the Boston Globe and the Boston Herald, my face on the front page that said cocaine underneath it. So at 18 years old, I was publicly known to have a cocaine issue. And I sat on the couch and I waited. I waited months and months for college coaches to call me, and finally this coach in Fresno, California said, I want to give you a chance. I want to give you a second chance. And at 18 years old, that's all I needed to hear. So I jumped on a plane and I flew to Fresno, California. And when I landed in Fresno, California, my coach surrounded me with people in recovery. I was hanging out with people in AA, I was hanging out with people in NA, I was going to meetings, and with those type of mentors in my life, my sophomore season was the best year of my college basketball career. At the end of my sophomore year, I was talking to NBA scouts about leaving school early, and they were telling me, all you gotta do is go back one more season and prove yourself. I went back for my junior season, and in my junior season, my ego got too big. I didn't need these mentors around me. I didn't need these positive influences. I wanted to hang out with my friends and do it my way. Slowly but surely, I started falling back into that lifestyle. I had just got done playing Duke University. I had the best game of my college basketball career against them. When I flew back into Fresno, there were 15 general managers on campus telling me, in 2 months, enter your name into the NBA draft. You're gonna make $1.5 to $1.9 million a year for 5 years, guaranteed money. When I walked out of that meeting, my athletic director pulled me aside and he said, Christopher, congratulations, but you gotta promise me one thing. You will not fail another drug test. And I looked at that man and I laughed in his face and I said, are you serious, sir? I would never blow this opportunity. He said, because if you do, there's gonna be consequences. 2 weeks later, I was playing against UMass Amherst on national TV, CBS Sports, 2 o'clock Sunday afternoon. Saturday night, I went out with my friends for a couple of beers. For me, a couple of beers turned to 12. I picked up the phone, I called my cocaine dealer and I said, can you meet me out? He said, Chris, you gotta be smart. You have a game on national TV tomorrow. I said, if you don't meet me out, someone else will. He met me out at midnight. I did my first line of cocaine at midnight. I did my last line of cocaine at 1:30 the next afternoon. I was sitting in the parking lot watching 15,000 fans walk into this arena to watch me play basketball on national TV with 2 girls drinking Budweisers and doing as much cocaine as I possibly could before the game time. Finally, a half hour before game time, I drank my last beer, I did my last line, I walked in, I played in that game. After that game, my athletic director walked into the locker room and he said, congratulations, good win, but do me a favor, something wasn't right when you walked into this arena. Please go take your drug test, it's waiting for you in the training room. When he said that, I knew I had been caught. I shook his hand, I said, sir, don't waste your time on the drug test, I'm gonna fail it for cocaine, I haven't slept yet. He said, I told you there's gonna be consequences, so tonight you're gonna walk into a room just like we're in right now and you're gonna hold a press conference. You're going to announce to the public that at 21 years old you have a cocaine addiction. And for that cocaine addiction, you're going to jump on a plane, you're going to fly to Salt Lake City, Utah, and you're going to spend 28 days in a treatment center. At 21 years old, I did the press conference, I jumped on a plane, I flew to Salt Lake City, Utah. I sat in that treatment center for 28 days, and every night I called my mom and dad and said, can you please get me out of here? I'm not like these people. I'll never be like these people, Mom. My mom couldn't do anything for me. I had to do my 28 days. I wasted my time, I wasted their time. Once again, I thought I was above it. I jumped on a plane, I flew back to Fresno. I played in my senior season. In my senior season, my wife got pregnant. My son, little Chris, was born. We got married, and at the end of my senior season, I was fortunate enough to get drafted by the Denver Nuggets, the 3rd pick in the 2nd round. I walked into that locker room, a 2nd round draft pick with no guaranteed money, and the NBA general managers, if I bump into them now, they still tell me that that Saturday night with my friends cost me around $6 million. They hope it was a good one. When I walked into that locker room with the Denver Nuggets, though, I walked in there with some true leaders and true friends, and they pulled me aside and they said, Chris, we know your story. We know you have a cocaine addiction. We know you've struggled with alcohol and marijuana. It's not going to happen here. We've taken alcohol off our plane. There'll be no drinking and smoking on this team. When we go on road trips, you will not leave the hotel unless you're with one of us. Periodically, we're going to check on your room to make sure you're in it. We're going to make sure you take advantage of this opportunity. I took advantage of that opportunity with those guys, and I had a great rookie season. I ended on a high note. And when that season ended, I moved back to Fall River, Massachusetts, and I bought a big house and a couple of cars, and I started settling in with my wife and my son. And at 22 years old, I was proud of the fact that I just purchased my first home. So I decided to throw a big cookout with all my high school friends. And this kid that I went to middle school and high school with walked into my backyard and he said, Chris, let's take a walk. So I walked around the front of my house. He said, remember we were in high school and once in a while we could get our hands on Vicodins and Percocets? I said, yeah. He said, there's this new drug, and he reached in his pocket and he pulled out this little Ziploc bag and was filled with these little yellow pills. He said, see these pills right here? These are called OxyContin. They're 40 milligrams. They're like taking 5 Percs or 5 Vicodin in one shot. They're $20. Do you want one? I looked at those little yellow pills in that bag. I reached in my pocket. I peeled the $20 bill. I handed it to him. He dropped that little yellow pill in the palm of my hand. And I looked at it and I laughed at it. I said, "Are you serious, man? I got to pay $20 for this thing?" I threw it in my mouth. I went back to the cookout. I had no idea that that decision was going to change my life forever. I had no idea my whole world was going to flip upside down that day. I had no idea that that 40 milligram pill was going to turn to 1,600 milligrams a day. I had no idea that the $20 I spent was going to turn to $25,000 a month dope habit. I had no idea, man, when it was time for me to go back for my second season in the NBA. I'd be a full-blown junkie walking into training camp 4 months later. I walked into that training camp fully blown out on OxyContins, and I said to myself, I'm going to shake this monster. So I left the OxyContin home, and I jumped on a plane, and I flew to Denver, and I locked myself in a hotel room for 5 days. And for 5 days, I tossed and turned. I was sweating. I was freezing cold, throwing up, legs kicking. And every night, at 22 years old, I looked at myself in the mirror, and I said to myself, I can't believe you did this, Chris. And after 5 days of detoxing, I'm laying in bed in my hotel room, and my phone rang. And when I answered the phone, it was Rick Pitino. Rick Pitino was the head coach of the Boston Celtics at that time, and Rick Pitino said, "Congratulations, son. I just made you the newest member of the Boston Celtics." Me playing for the Boston Celtics was my dream. I laid in bed dope sick, sat there stunned, and he said, "I just want you to know, Chris, that only 5 people in the history of the Boston Celtics organization ever grew up in New England, put on a uniform. So this is quite an honor. All the media are excited around here. Come home tomorrow. We have a press conference scheduled at 12 o'clock at the Boston Garden." When I hung up that phone, I didn't call my dad and my mom and say, "That little boy that was in your driveway since he was this big, I'm now a Celtic." I didn't call my wife and my son to say, "I'm coming home tomorrow." I called that kid with the yellow pill. And I said, "I've been kicking this dope, man, for 5 days. I can't do it anymore. I got a press conference scheduled at 12 o'clock tomorrow. They just made me a Boston Celtic. Can you please meet me in a parking lot when I get there?" As I pulled into that parking lot in a limousine, all the local media were outside waiting. I jumped out of the limo. I walked into the arena. They were taking their pictures. I looked over to my left, and there the kid with the yellow pill was sitting in his car waiting for me. I held that press conference. I held my jersey. I told him it was a dream come true. I told him I couldn't wait for the opportunity. I lied. I could care less about the Boston Celtics. The only thing I could think about was getting in that car and getting my OCs. When the press conference ended, I got my OxyContin, I threw it in my mouth, and I never looked back. In my 10th game, 12th game as a Boston Celtic, I'm sitting in the locker room with Paul Pierce, and Rick Pitino walks in, and he tells me, "Get ready, you're my starting point guard tonight." For the first 12 games, I wasn't playing. And for the first 12 games, I'd leave my guy with the yellow pill a ticket. He'd meet me in a player's parking lot after the game, and he'd give me my pills for the night and for the next day. But Rick Pitino just told me, "I'm going to be playing in this game as a starting point guard." So I jumped on the phone, and I called the kid with the yellow pill, and I said, "In an hour and 10 minutes, I'm going to hear my dream come true. But without you, I can't do it." So I said, "Please get in your car and bring me my pills." He jumped in his car, and he started driving to Boston, and every 10 minutes, I would run outside, run into the locker room to check my phone. And finally, with eight minutes to go on the scoreboard, I called his phone and he said, "Chris, I hate to tell you this, but I'm stuck in traffic. If you want these, you got to come outside and get them. I'm head to toe in Celtics." I walk out the back stairs, I walk through the back parking lot, and I step out onto Causeway Street, and I look at all the cars. I'm in my Celtics warm-ups hanging on the street corner before my game, waiting for my pills. I walk down Causeway Street, I finally find his car, I get my 800 milligrams, I throw it into my mouth, I turn around, I run back in, I run up the stairs, I come through the tunnel. When I come through the tunnel, there's 2 minutes to go on the clock. 2 minutes later, they announce 6'2" guard from Fall River, Massachusetts, those words that I used to pretend. I don't even remember hearing those words. My first memory as a Celtic was copping dope on a street corner in my warm-ups. Halfway through the season, I was playing against the Los Angeles Lakers, and Shaquille O'Neal went up to block my shot. I let the ball go. He took my arm. He tore my rotator cuff and fractured my collarbone. That injury ended my season with the Boston Celtics. And when that season ended, we went separate ways, and the Dallas Mavericks called me and said, there's a chance you could be our point guard. So I flew down to Dallas, I signed a Summer League deal, and I flew back to Boston. I played in the NBA Summer League at UMass Boston. In the NBA Summer League, you play 7 games. I had just finished my 5th game. I was leading the league in scoring and assists. My agent went out with the Utah Jazz and the Philadelphia 76ers the night. So we're going to pay him $2.5 to $2.9 million a year for 3 years, guaranteed money, $8 million contract. My agent called me that night in my hotel room and he said, all you got to do, Christopher, is finish these next 2 games and I'm going to make you a multi-millionaire. I went to bed that night in the hotel with my wife and my son. I woke up the next morning, I threw my backpack on and I'm walking through the lobby. As I'm walking through the lobby, my phone kept ringing. I pulled it out. When I pulled it out, it was the kid with the yellow pills' brother, who said, Chris, man, my brother wants you to know that he can't make it today. He got locked up last night and has nothing to bring you. As I'm walking through that lobby, I said 800 milligrams or $8 million. And as I'm walking aboard the bus, as soon as I'm about to get on the bus, I stopped in my track, I turned around, I walked back into the lobby, I grabbed my coach's hand and I said, sir, thank you for the opportunity, but I quit. I walked away from that $8 million contract to jump in my car to drive to Fall River to get my 800 milligrams. As soon as I got out of my system, I jumped on the phone, I called them back and I said, give me a second chance, let me play in that last game. And they said, we don't do second chances. You had your chance. For the next 3 months, I sat at home waiting for teams to call me and finally the #1 team in Europe, from Bologna, Italy. Bologna, Italy called my phone. Bologna, Italy offered me $50,000 a month in cash, no taxes. 2 cars for me and my wife, a beautiful home and a school for my son to go to. The contract was about $500,000 in cash. 3 weeks later, me and my wife decided to start our career over in Europe, so we jumped on a plane. In my luggage, I had 380 smuggled. And I had it written down on paper that I was going to cut my milligrams down every day. And after 5 months, I'll finally shake this monster. Unfortunately, OxyContin doesn't play that way. And I ran out after 3 weeks. I woke up sick. I had practice in 4 hours. I jumped in my car, and on my way to practice, I said, let me pull into the train station. So I pulled into the train station. I watched this man get off a park bench and serve cars as they pulled up. And after a half hour watching this, I finally said, it's my turn. I started my car, I pulled up, this little Italian man walked up to my window. At 24 years old, in Bologna, Italy, I couldn't say OxyContin in Italian. I couldn't say Percocets. The only thing I could think of at 24 years old was just to point to my veins. When I pointed to my veins, the man nodded his head yes. He sat in my car, we drove down the street, I pulled down this little alley. He looked at me one more time and he said, are you sure heroin and not cocaine? I said, heroin. He reached in his pocket, he pulled out 15 balloons of black tar heroin. He said, how many do you want? And I said, I want them all. I bought all 15 balloons of black tar heroin, I put them in my pocket, he reached in his pocket, he pulled out a spoon, and he started cooking heroin on my front seat. At 24 years old, I'd never been in the presence of heroin. I'd never been around the needle. But at 24 years old, sitting in that seat, detoxing off OxyContin, that man looked at me and said, roll up your sleeve. At 24 years old, I rolled up my sleeve, I looked away, and I let that man shoot me up. At 24 years old, I became an intravenous drug addict. At 24 years old, I never went back to OxyContin. Halfway through the season, my coach showed up at my doorstep and said, the bus is outside, we got training camp in the mountains. I looked at that coach, I said, how many days are we going to the mountains? He said, we'll be there for 10 days, pack your bags. I extended my hand, I said, sir, best of luck in the mountains, I quit. I can't go to the mountains for 10 days because I can't take the guy with the balloons with me. And without him, there is no basketball in my life. So I closed the door, I went back into my apartment, I packed my family up, we jumped on a plane, we flew back to Rhode Island. And for the next 4 months, I had no job, and for the next 4 months, I leave my wife and kids in the house every day and tell them I'm going to Dunkin' Donuts, I'll be right back. And for the next 4 months, I meet the same dope dealer in the same spot at the same time to spend the same amount of money. He'd pull it on the side of me, I'd throw him $120, he'd throw me 2 bundles of heroin, I'd sit there, I'd shoot up, I'd put my seat back, I'd let the heroin kick in. I jump in the drive-thru, I order munchkins for my kids, I walk into my house like everything was great. Except this day, by the grace of God, I didn't put my seat back. Because I felt a feeling I had never felt before, so I started my car and I jumped in the drive-thru immediately. But the next thing I remember is glass hitting me in my face, 2 police officers punching me on my chest. Another police officer shattering out my side window, reaching in and throwing my car in park. When they got my car in park, they grabbed me by my shirt and ripped me out and laid me down in the cement. I looked up, there was a crowd of people around me. I looked up at the police officer and I said, "Officer, what's going on, man? What's the problem?" The police officer looked at me and he said, "Christopher, what's the problem, son? Look at your arm." And I'm laying there on my back and I look down to my right and my arm is covered in blood and there's a needle still in it. And he said, "The problem is, son, you just overdosed. When you overdosed, you took your foot off the brake and you hit that woman in front of you. You got a right to remain silent." They picked me up, they cuffed me, and they put me in the back of the car. They brought me to the hospital, they cleared me, they transferred me to jail. 5 hours later, I bailed out. The first person I called, well, it wasn't my mom and dad to say, "Hey, your son, I have a heroin problem." It wasn't my wife to say, "Don't let the kids see the news." It was that guy I met in the parking lot. Because the dope was so good, it almost killed me. And that's how sick the monster is. The next country that would take a chance on me was Istanbul, Turkey. Istanbul, Turkey is punishable by life in prison if you smuggle drugs into their country. So I said to myself, I found dope in Bologna, Providence, Boston, I'll find it in Istanbul. I left the dope behind. As soon as I landed in Istanbul, I hit the baddest neighborhoods trying to hustle heroin. And every night the dope dealers would shake their finger and shoo me away and say no. So every night I went back to my hotel room, I cried, I kicked this dope, I drank as much whiskey and vodka as I possibly could to knock myself out. And after 2.5 weeks of this, I couldn't do it no more. So I jumped on the phone and I called the kid with the yellow pill and I said, "I just wired you $5,000, man. FedEx me $5,000 worth of oxys." He said, "I'm not gonna do that to you, Chris. I can't put your name on a package like that." I said, "You don't have a choice. You have my money. Leave your name off it." I hung up the phone. He called me back 2 hours later. He said, "Your package will be there in 7 days at your doorstep." On day 7, I'm in the yard with my wife and my son and my daughter. My coach walked into my backyard and said, "Chris, we just got a phone call from FedEx. They say there's a package waiting for you at their downtown office. They're not going to deliver it to your home. They want you to bring your passport, come in and sign for it." As soon as they said that, I said, "This is a setup. I got to leave this package alone because if I claim this package, I'm going to jail for the rest of my life in this country." So I looked at my 2 children, I gave them a kiss, I said goodbye, and I jumped in my car and I drove there. I sat in that parking lot dope sick for a half hour, and finally I said, "I'm going in to get my package." I walked into the front door. When I walked in, there was a man with a gun to my right and a man with a gun to my left. They pointed me up to the counter. I walked up. The man asked me for my passport. I gave it to him. He went into the back. He got my package. He came around the front. As soon as I saw my package in his hands, I knew I was in trouble. The top had been cut off and it was wrapped in yellow tape. So I turned around and I started running for the door. When I got to the door, the 2 men with the gun stepped in front of it, put their gun like this, blocked me and said, "Go get your package." I walked up to that package. The man handed it to me. When I picked it up, I tightened up because I thought they were going to get me. I turned around, they were still there at the door. I walked right in between the men. I got in my car, started driving down the street, and I pulled down a little side street and I started going through my package. The plan was to put it in the Boston Globe sports page. When I got to the sports page, I could see where all the 80s had been taped. And there was an envelope stuck to it, and I opened up the envelope and it said, "Dear Mr. Herren, when I was a kid, my father used to drag me all over Massachusetts to watch me play basketball. I currently work at Logan Airport, and this package was put on my desk suspected of drug smuggling. There's 9 men in my office. If they land on anyone else's desk, you'll be in jail for the rest of your life. In Turkey. Please take this as a sign to get some help, if not for you, for your wife and your kids." I threw that package out the window, man. I could care less about that sign. I drove to that ghetto in Istanbul, and I found my dope dealer 2 hours later, and I kept that dope dealer with me for the next 9 months. And after that 9 months was up, I jumped on a plane and I flew right to Warsaw, Poland to start a new job in Warsaw, Poland. And I had been there for 2 months, and the team called me in the office and they said, "You're a junkie. You're no good. We're sending you home." And I said, sir, you can send me home, but pay me my money. I've been here 2 months working for you. And they said, we're not paying you a dime. All we're giving you is a flight out of here. Where do you want to go? I said, I'm not ready to fly to Boston or Providence to face my family. Fly me to Fresno, California, where I went to college. Because in Fresno, California, I got an old college buddy who played in the NFL, had a couple of stints, 6'6" tight end. He was married to a Fresno State cheerleader. They had 2 kids the same age as my kids. This football player had the same problem I had. No one knew about it yet. So I had him pick me up at the airport. When he took one look at me, he said, you don't look good, man. I said, I don't feel good. He said, I figured you want to open up the middle console. When I opened up the middle console, there was a ½ ounce of coke, a finger of black tar heroin. And he said, there's needles in the glove box. You can get up now, or you can wait till we get to my house. I waited till we got to his house, and we pulled through this beautiful gated community in the suburbs of Fresno. The gates closed behind us. We pulled up into his driveway. We walked up to his front door. This little girl, 22 years old, answered the door. She introduced herself as Lisa, the football player's personal assistant. Lisa went back into the office. Me and a football player went into the living room. And for 5 days, 2 former professional athletes sat on a couch speedball. We speedballed for 5 days straight where the paranoia was so overwhelming. The last 2 days, we locked ourselves in a bedroom. We were waiting for the police to come through the door. There were no police. 5 days of this torture. My phone kept ringing. And I pulled it out of my pocket, and when I answered, it was my wife. And my wife said, the kids miss you. They haven't seen you for 9 months. I bought a flight. We're in Chicago. Pick us up at the airport in 2.5 hours. I hadn't left this bedroom for 2 days. I hung up the phone. I jumped in the shower. I grabbed the keys to the Escalade, and I started driving down the highway. The paranoia is overwhelming, so I'm pulling the car over, and I'm waiting 20 minutes because I think people are following me. I'm letting them go. Then it settles down. I get back on. I start driving. The same thing happens. I pull over. I wait 20 minutes. 7 hours of this. I couldn't do it no more. At 27 years old, I put the car in a breakdown lane. I walked out in front of it. I waited for the next car to come. As soon as I saw those headlights coming, I timed it, and I jumped out in front of the car. I jumped out in front of a car going 75 miles an hour because I wanted that car to hit me in my chest and just drag me down the highway and put me out of my misery. When I jumped out, the man swerved. He crashed. The next car coming hit her brakes, and she stopped right in front of me. I stood there on the highway. That woman called 911. 2 minutes later, I saw the California Highway Patrol coming, and I ran to him. I ran to the police, and I said, I'm 27. I'm 5 hours late to pick up my wife and kids. I can't live like this no more. Take me to jail. They cuffed me. They took my heart rate, and they said, you're going to go into cardiac arrest. Your heart rate's way too high. So they brought me to the hospital. They shot me up with sedatives, and they transferred me to jail that next day. I woke up on the jail cell floor. I don't remember being processed. I woke up in a jail cell with 40 guys I had never seen before. And at 10 o'clock that night, they called me up to the window with 5 other men, and they said, you guys have been released. Here's your summons. Show up to court to face your court date. I took that summons, and as I was walking out of the jail cell, I said to myself, if I do one thing right in my life, I'm cutting ties with my wife and kids. They don't deserve a father like me, a husband like me, so I'm gonna go homeless. I had $17 in my pocket. No more credit cards, no more ATM cards, no more checkbooks. With a wife and 2 kids, $17 is what I had to my name. 3 years earlier, I was making $500,000 in Italy. 4 years earlier, I was being announced in the starting lineup for the Celtics. Now all I have is $17 to work with, so with that $17, I was starting my life over on the street. I walked into this 7-Eleven in Modesto, California. I bought a soda. I walked behind the 7-Eleven. I jumped in their dumpster. I ripped out some cardboard, and I made my bed in between the dumpster and the chain link fence down. I woke up the next morning, 2 homeless men touching me, asking me if I was okay. They picked me up off the ground. They said, you can't sleep here, son. It's not safe. There's a homeless shelter 3 blocks away. Follow us. We're going to sign you in. I walked with these 2 homeless men to the homeless shelter. They signed me in for the night. And for the next 3 hours, we sat behind a liquor store drinking 40 ounces with that $17. And after 3 hours of drinking with these 2 homeless men, I had $2.50 left. I walked into the liquor store. I put the beer on the counter. And as soon as I put the beer on the counter, the homeless man who picked me up off the ground took it off the counter and said, "You're not buying it." I looked at him and I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Chris, I lost my family 19 years ago. I've been homeless for 18 years. It's not too late to get your family back. I want you to get quarters with this $2.50. Go across the street, pick up the payphone, call your family and tell them you're sorry." I walked across the street to that payphone. I called my wife and kids. I told my wife I was sorry, and my wife said, "I don't care about your sorries. I just want you to know that your 2 children stood on that sidewalk for 5 hours. For 5 hours, they said every car that pulled up into the airport, 'Here comes Dad,' and every car blew right past your kids. And after 5 hours, I finally convinced them that you weren't going to make it. So I put him in a taxi and brought him home." She said, "What's the address?" And I gave it to her. I sat in front of that 7-Eleven for 9 hours waiting for her to show up. She never came, so I went back in between the dumpster and the chain link fence. I woke up the next morning to a horn. When I picked my head up, it was my wife in the car. I got up, I jumped in the car, and my 2 kids were in the back seat crying their eyes out. And they kept asking me, how come I don't want to be their father no more? Why would I leave them at the airport like that? How come you're sleeping on the street? I listened to my kids cry and ask those questions for 2.5 hours all the way home. For 2.5 hours, I didn't have an answer. And that night when I got home, that football player called my phone. That football player said, "I heard about what happened. I'm sorry, but I want to make it right for you." And I said, "How are you going to make it right?" He said, "Me and Lisa are going to be at your house at 12:30 tonight. Let little Chris, Samantha, and Heather fall asleep. Jump in my car, we'll go back to my house, we'll get you high, you'll feel better, we'll bring you home before they wake up." For the first time in my life, I said, "Nah, man, I'm good." So I hung up the phone. He called me back at 1:30 in the morning. At 1:30 in the morning, I saw his name on the caller ID, and I put the phone back down. The next time that phone rang was at 5:30 in the morning. At 5:30 in the morning, when I picked up the phone, it was his wife. His wife was crying, and all she could say, "Were you with him last night?" And I said, "No." She said, "Put on the news." So I clicked on the news. The football player's face popped up. His house popped up, and they said last night at 2:30 in the morning, an unknown assailant kicked in the front door a former football player. When police arrived on scene at 2:30 in the morning, they found the football player and the 22-year-old girl, his personal assistant. Both of them on the living room floor with bullets in the back of their head. They were executed that night over $400. First time in my life I said no, man. That night, and it saved my life. After the murder investigation, I jumped on a plane and I flew back to Portsmouth, Rhode Island with my wife and my 2 children. And from the age of 28 to 32 years old, I was a street junkie. I hung out in hospital cafeterias. I walked up and down Main Street in Fall River asking people for money, trying to get free bags of heroin. My kids got off the school bus. There were no more Xboxes and PlayStations and DSs in my house. My wife woke up, there was no more jewelry. Everything was in a pawn shop. There were months we couldn't put heat. There were nights we couldn't get our lights on. We used to give our kids bath by warming the water on the stove. At 24 years old, man, I was a Boston Celtic. At 30 years old, I can't put lights on in my house. On June 4th, 2008, my routine was to put my 2 children on the school bus and then walk up to the liquor store and buy a pint of Pop-Off vodka because that's all I could afford. So I'd put them on the school bus, I'd walk up to the liquor store. I'd buy my Pop-Off, I'd sit there, I'd drink it as fast as I can, I'd walk out to the 7-Eleven, I'd stand in front of it. And in my pocket, I had an empty pack of cigarettes. And I'd watch the people come in, going into the gas station, putting out their poke-outs. And I'd run up to the ashtray and I'd fill my pack up with their cigarettes. And then I'd go home. That's what my day consisted of. On June 4th, 2008, I put little Chris on a school bus and I put Sammy on a school bus. Little Chris is 9 and Sammy is 7. And I said, I'll be home when you get home. I walked up to the liquor store, I got my vodka, I came back home, I got a phone call, they said, if you can make it to Fall River, we'll give you 4 free bags of heroin. I jumped in my car, I drove to Fall River, I sat in the side street, I waited 20 minutes, finally he pulled up, he threw 4 bags through my window. By the time I picked my head up, he was gone. I sat there, I shot up. As soon as I shot up, I felt that feeling. I felt in Dunkin' Donuts parking lot. So I panicked and started my car and started driving. I don't remember driving. The next thing I remember is a police officer standing over me in an ambulance telling me to keep my mouth shut because I was just dead 30 seconds ago. The police report said my skin was gray, my lips were blue, and my eyes were behind my head, and they administered Narcan 3 times and I didn't react to it. The police officer pulled up on scene, said throw him in the ambulance. They got me in the ambulance, and in the back of the ambulance I came back. They pulled me into Child Memorial Hospital, where my dad used to be the politician in that district. And I used to be the kid with the brightest future and the biggest dreams. And now at 32 years old, I'm walking into this emergency room a junkie, where doctors don't even want to look at me and nurses don't even want to pay attention to me. They kept me there by myself for about 20 minutes. They walked in, they shined the light in my eyes, they took my blood pressure, and they looked at the police officer as I stood there in handcuffs and said, get him out of here. The police officer said, I feel so bad for you, Chris. I'm going to uncuff you. I'm going to summons you. But the next 45 days, I want you to go get some help and go to treatment. As soon as he uncuffed me, I said to myself, I'm done. I'm walking to my homeboy's house 2 blocks away. I'm going into his bedroom. I'm grabbing his gun. I'm sticking it in my mouth. And I'm going to end it. I'm going to kill myself today. And as I'm walking out of the hospital thinking about how I'm going to kill myself, this nurse keeps yelling my name, saying, Chris, come back. Chris, come back. And I looked at her and I brushed her off and I kept walking. And finally she said, I went to high school with your mother. My mom died at a young age. So I turned around and I said, don't talk about my mother right now. And she said, I have to because your mom's talking to me right now, telling me to help her little baby, so please get back in here. I spun around, I walked back in, I sat in the room with that woman, I sat there for 5 hours as she called treatment centers saying, I got a former NBA basketball player who has no money and no health insurance, will you give him a free bed? Finally, this place said, we'll give him 5 days. I did my 5 days. After that 5 days was up, I got a phone call from a guy I played in the NBA with, who said he's been in the same position, he wants to help. Chris Mullins sent me away for 6 months to a treatment center in New York. This treatment center was a therapeutic community, and for the first 35 days, I couldn't have contact with my family. So on day 35, they brought me into the office, they let me call my wife. When my wife answered the phone, she said, I just want to know one thing, can you come home because I'm going into labor? When I was found on the side of the road, my wife is 8 months pregnant, expecting our 3rd child. I looked at my counselor and I said, can I go home? And he said, bad idea. I said, sir, I could care less what you think, to be honest with you. I was high for little Chris's birth, I was high for Samantha's birth. I want to be sober for one of my children's birth. So I jumped in a taxi, I went to the train station. 4 hours later, I walked into Women's and Infants Hospital. 2 hours later, my son Drew was born. They passed that baby off to me. At 32 years old, I held that baby sober and proud for about 5 hours in a room by myself. A nurse came in and said, there's 2 little kids coming up in the elevator right now that are all excited to meet their little brother. Little Chris and Sammy came running into the room. Little Chris asked if he could hold him. I passed him to little Chris and I told him, stay right here, I'll be right back. I walked right out of that room, walked right out of that hospital, jumped on a phone, called my dope dealer, he picked me up and I left him stranded there. 35 days into this, I jumped back in the car and I was shooting heroin and smoking coke that night. That night at 3:30 in the morning, I walked into my house, my 2 kids were looking at me saying, don't ever come back. Every time you come around here, you ruin this. The next morning, I woke them up, I put them in the car. I walked into the hospital, my wife was laying in bed. My wife I met in the 7th grade. My wife knew me long before I was an NBA basketball player and long before I was a junkie. And she said, you broke my heart 1,000,000 times, but this is the last time you do it to my children. Don't ever come back here. I just called security, you better leave. I gave my kids a kiss. I walked out of that hospital, I went back to the train station. When I walked through the front door of that treatment center, my counselor was waiting there for me at the door and he said, we got a phone call, we heard you had a tough home visit. And I said, I lost my family on that. He said, Christopher, I'm going to tell you something right now, man. It happens all the time here. But tonight at 10 o'clock, come to my office, I'm gonna help you out. All day I wondered what this man had to offer me. At 10 o'clock sharp, I knocked on his door, he called me and he tossed me a cell phone. He said, now you're gonna do the best thing you ever did in your life, son. You're gonna flip that cell phone open, you're gonna call your wife and kids. You're gonna tell your wife you promise you'll never contact her again. You're gonna promise her that you'll disappear. And you're gonna tell your wife to explain to your 3 kids that their father died in a car accident. That's why they'll never see you again. You're gonna play dead for them. Because you're a no-good scumbag, loser junkie who doesn't deserve a family. And I looked at that man and that hit me in my gut and I started crying, I lost it. I sat down in his office, I tossed him back the chair, I tossed him back the phone. And I said, sir, I know what I am. I've been calling myself that for 10 years, a no-good scumbag, loser junkie. I walked back to my house, I walked back to my room. I hit my knees and I started praying. I started praying on August 1st, 2008. Today, that's my sobriety day. I thank God every day for that man's words. I thank God every day for those 2 homeless men. I thank God every day for that spot in between a chain link fence and a dumpster. I thank God every day for all my overdoses. My worst days have become my best days because they brought me to today, and that's a fact, Jack. That's the realest talk I can give you. I travel around the country doing this, trying to get people to not go through what I went through. I wrote a book. And people often say, like, man, I can't believe you put that stuff in there about your kids, man. That you were shooting up in front of them, that you were stealing their stuff. And I said I did that because I know there's people doing the same thing. And one time in my life, I never ever thought that I could overcome that guilt. And that I could overcome that shame. And when I was able to overcome it, I needed to share it. Today, at almost 4 years sober, I started my own company. I have a nonprofit organization that helps pay for people to go away for treatment. I've been married for 14 years and my son is now 13, he's in 7th grade, my daughter's 10, my other guy is almost 4. The greatest gift of my recovery has been watching my children recover, as watching their ease enter their eyes and feel good about themselves again. There was a point in my life where my kids would dig their feet into the yard and say, I'm not jumping in the car with you. I'm sick of waiting in parking lots and going into crack houses. Today my kids will jump on a plane with me without me even telling them where we're going. That's the greatest gift that I've been given in this process. You know, I just spoke. I spoke at a middle school where a 13 and a 14-year-old boy were found in their bedroom, overdosed with a needle in their arm. 13 years old, 7th grade, 14 years old, 8th grade. I was just in Seattle, Washington when this little boy came running up to me and he grabbed me by my waist. And he started crying. He said, I just wish you were here last year so my brother could hear you. And I said, why? What happened to your brother? He said, my brother was drafted by Major League Baseball last year. My brother had a perk 30 problem. The last text message on his phone was that I'll be at your house in 10 minutes. I have $50. I need 2. When that 18-year-old boy walked into the apartment in Seattle, Washington, there was a guy behind the door waiting for him and hit him in the head with a pipe. Killed him on scene. Over $50. You know, when I walked into this building, I said to myself, what an amazing place. I wish there were more places like this. I mean, to walk in the front door and to know that there's a place for recovering addicts, for struggling addicts, for mental illness, where people can come and have a safe place to hang out is pretty amazing. When I was first getting sober, I couldn't afford anything. And my guy, I was sitting in an AA meeting, and I was living in the Miller House in Cape Cod, and every day we had to get up on a van and go to AA meetings. And I looked at my buddy and I said, man, I'm so sick of this van. I feel like an animal. They bring me in here, they get me off the van, they walk me in single file into the AA meeting, and everybody looks at me funny. And that kid told me, that van's bringing you to save your life, man. Get grateful for it. So I never took that van for granted again. And I would hope that the people here never take this place for granted. It was an honor being here. Thank you very much for letting me come.